When Jessica Williams called John Kennedy a backward hick on CNN, she was certain she was speaking for sophisticated viewers who shared her contempt for Southern conservatives. The insult was meant to be just another example of her sharp wit and intellectual superiority. But Kennedy's calm response revealed that Williams herself came from the very background she was mocking, and her desperate attempts to hide her own backward origins had led her to build her entire career on lies. The CNN studios in Atlanta hummed with the familiar energy of live television production, banks of monitors displaying breaking news feeds while producers rushed between control rooms coordinating the network's evening programming. Studio 7, where Prime Focus with Jessica Williams was broadcast nightly to millions of viewers across America, gleamed under the harsh television lights that transformed every gesture and expression into carefully choreographed political theater. Jessica Williams sat behind her anchor desk with the kind of confident authority that had made her one of CNN's most recognizable faces over the past 5 years. At 42, she projected an image of sophisticated intelligence that resonated strongly with the network's liberal viewership, perfectly styled auburn hair, designer glasses that suggested intellectual seriousness, and the kind of polished delivery that came from years of media training and careful image cultivation. Williams had built her television career on a particular brand of progressive commentary that combined sharp political analysis with personal attacks on conservative politicians who didn't meet her standards of sophistication and enlightenment. Her viewers tuned in nightly to watch her dissect Republican policies and mock the politicians who promoted them, particularly those from the South and rural America who represented everything she claimed to oppose about backward thinking and cultural regression. Tonight's show was focused on what Williams called the crisis of American anti-intellectualism, a theme that allowed her to examine the supposed gap between educated coastal elites and the ignorant masses who supported conservative politicians. Her producers had assembled a panel of like-minded commentators and carefully selected clips of Republican senators making statements that could be portrayed as examples of primitive thinking unsuited to modern governance. What Williams's audience didn't know was that her carefully constructed persona as a sophisticated intellectual from an educated background was built on a foundation of lies and deliberate deceptions that had taken her years to perfect. The woman who spent her evenings mocking others for their supposed lack of sophistication had herself grown up in circumstances that were far humbler than she had ever admitted publicly. As Williams prepared for her opening monologue, she reviewed the lineup of targets she planned to attack during tonight's broadcast. Senator Ted Cruz would be mocked for his constitutional originalism. Governor Ron DeSantis would be ridiculed for his cultural policies, and Senator John Neely Kennedy of Louisiana would serve as her primary example of everything wrong with Southern conservative politics. Williams had been looking for an opportunity to take down Kennedy for months, viewing him as the perfect symbol of the kind of backward thinking that she argued was holding America back from progressive enlightenment. His Louisiana accent, his folksy manner, and his unapologetic conservatism made him an ideal target for the kind of intellectual condescension that played well with CNN's audience. "Good evening. I'm Jessica Williams, and welcome to Prime Focus," she began, her voice carrying the kind of authoritative tone that suggested she was about to deliver important truths to viewers intelligent enough to understand them. "Tonight we're examining the dangerous rise of anti-intellectual politics in America, and the politicians who profit from keeping their constituents ignorant and afraid." Williams launched into a carefully crafted monologue that touched on familiar themes of progressive superiority over conservative ignorance. She spoke about the need for evidence-based policymaking, the importance of scientific expertise in governance, and the dangers of allowing emotion and tradition to override rational analysis in political decision-making. For 20 minutes, Williams built her case for intellectual elitism with the kind of sophisticated argumentation that had made her a favorite among educated liberal viewers who wanted their political prejudices confirmed by someone who sounded authoritative and knowledgeable. Her delivery was polished, her examples were carefully chosen, and her conclusions were designed to make her audience feel superior to the millions of Americans who didn't share their progressive worldview. Then, Williams turned her attention to the evening's primary target, and her tone shifted from analytical to openly contemptuous. But perhaps no politician better represents the crisis of American anti-intellectualism than Senator John Kennedy of Louisiana, she said, her voice dripping with disdain as a photo of Kennedy appeared on the screen behind her. Here's a man who sits on the Senate Judiciary Committee, who helps confirm federal judges, and who presents himself as some kind of folksy constitutional scholar when he's really just a backward hick who appeals to voters too ignorant to recognize his limitations. The phrase backward hick hung in the air with particular venom, and Williams paused to let her contempt register with viewers who shared her assessment of Southern conservative politicians. Around the CNN newsroom, producers and staff members nodded in approval, clearly enjoying their anchor's willingness to speak what they considered obvious truths about Republican politicians. Williams continued her attack with increasing confidence, encouraged by the positive response from her production team and the social media engagement that was already building around her Kennedy segment. Senator Kennedy likes to present himself as a simple country lawyer who's just asking common-sense questions about complex issues. But what he's really doing is pandering to anti-intellectual sentiment among voters who don't want to do the hard work of understanding policy nuances. She pulled out a folder of prepared materials, including selected quotes from Kennedy's recent committee appearances that had been edited to make him appear ignorant or out of touch. Just last week, Kennedy questioned a federal judicial nominee about constitutional interpretation in a way that revealed his complete lack of understanding about how modern jurisprudence actually works. This is the kind of primitive thinking that passes for wisdom in certain parts of America. Williams's attack was building toward a climax that would provide her viewers with the kind of intellectual satisfaction they expected from her show. She had positioned herself as the voice of educated, sophisticated Americans who understood the dangers of allowing backward politicians to influence national policy. The truth is, Williams concluded with obvious satisfaction, politicians like John Kennedy represent everything that's holding America back from joining the modern world. They appeal to the worst impulses of voters who prefer simple answers to complex questions, and they do it by pretending that ignorance is just another form of wisdom. The segment was classic Williams, sharp, condescending, and designed to make her liberal audience feel superior to conservatives they already despised. Social media immediately lit up with praise for her brave willingness to speak truth about Southern conservative politicians, and CNN's ratings showed the kind of spike that typically followed Williams's most controversial commentary. What Williams didn't expect was the phone call that came to CNN's main switchboard 30 minutes after her show ended. Senator Kennedy's office was requesting an opportunity for the senator to respond to Williams's characterization of his record and qualifications, and they were suggesting that such a response might be newsworthy enough to warrant airtime. CNN's producers initially dismissed the request as a typical political complaint about unfavorable coverage, but Kennedy's staff persisted with a level of confidence that suggested they had something more substantial in mind than routine damage control. After several hours of negotiation, the network agreed to allow Kennedy to appear on the following night's program for what was billed as a robust exchange of views about intellectual standards in American politics. Williams was delighted by the opportunity to confront Kennedy directly, viewing it as a chance to demonstrate her intellectual superiority while providing her audience with the spectacle of watching a sophisticated journalist dismantle a primitive politician in real time. She spent the day preparing for what she was certain would be an easy victory over someone she considered fundamentally outclassed. The next evening, Kennedy appeared via satellite from his Senate office, his familiar Louisiana drawl immediately apparent as he thanked Williams for the opportunity to respond to her previous night's commentary. His manner was courteous and respectful, showing none of the defensive anger that Williams had expected from someone who had been publicly humiliated on national television. "Ms. Williams," Kennedy began, his tone carrying the kind of patient courtesy that suggested he was genuinely interested in having a productive conversation. "I watched your show last night, and I have to say I was interested in your perspective on intellectual standards in American politics." Williams leaned forward with obvious confidence, clearly anticipating an opportunity to demonstrate her superior knowledge and analytical capabilities. "Senator, I appreciate you coming on the show. I hope we can have an honest discussion about the importance of bringing serious intellectual rigor to policy debates." Kennedy nodded agreeably, as if he shared her commitment to serious discussion. "I think that's important too, Ms. Williams. Intellectual honesty is certainly something we should all strive for. Since you've raised the subject, maybe you could help me understand something about your own background that's been puzzling me." Williams's confident expression flickered slightly, though she quickly recovered her composure. She had expected Kennedy to defend his own qualifications, not to question hers. "What's your question, Senator?" Kennedy consulted what appeared to be notes on his desk, his manner remaining conversational despite the obvious shift in the interview's direction. "Well, Ms. Williams, you've built your television career on criticizing politicians you consider intellectually inferior, particularly those from rural or southern backgrounds. I'm curious about your own educational credentials and professional experience that qualify you to make such judgments." The question was delivered with such courtesy that it took Williams a moment to realize that Kennedy was challenging her authority to criticize others' intellectual qualifications. She straightened in her chair, clearly preparing to recite the impressive credentials that had earned her position at CNN. "Senator, I graduated from Columbia University's School of Journalism and worked at several major newspapers before joining CNN," she said, her voice carrying the kind of confidence that suggested Kennedy was asking an obviously pointless question. Kennedy made a note on his paper and looked up with genuine curiosity. "That's interesting, Ms. Williams. Which newspapers did you work for, and what positions did he hold?" Williams hesitated for just a moment, clearly not expecting Kennedy to ask for specific details about her professional background. "I worked for various publications in New York and Washington, covering political and social issues." Kennedy's next question was delivered with the same courteous tone, but its implications were beginning to make Williams uncomfortable. "Could you be more specific about which publications? I'm always interested in the career paths that lead people to television journalism." Williams's confidence was beginning to waver as she realized that Kennedy wasn't asking general questions about her background, but seemed to have specific knowledge about her career history. "Senator, I don't see how the details of my resume are relevant to our discussion about political discourse." Kennedy smiled slightly, not in a mocking way, but with the kind of patience that suggested he was building toward a larger point. "Well, Ms. Williams, you spent considerable time last night attacking my qualifications and background. I think it's fair to examine the credentials of someone who positions herself as an authority on intellectual standards." Kennedy consulted his notes again and looked up at Williams with what appeared to be genuine puzzlement. "According to my staff's research, there's no record of you working for any major newspapers in New York or Washington before joining CNN. In fact, there's no record of you graduating from Columbia University's School of Journalism." The revelation hit Williams like a physical blow, and her face went visibly pale as she realized that Kennedy had somehow uncovered the truth about her fabricated background. Around the CNN newsroom, producers began frantically checking their own records, suddenly understanding that their star anchor might have built her career on lies.
Kennedy wasn't finished with his systematic dismantling of Williams's credibility. "What we did find, Ms. Williams, is that you grew up in Turtletown, Tennessee, population 427, and that your real name is Jennifer May Watkins. You attended community college for 2 years before dropping out to work at a local television station in Chattanooga." The studio was completely silent now, with Williams frozen in her chair as Kennedy methodically exposed the truth about her origins. The woman who had spent years mocking Southern conservatives for their supposed backwardness was herself from exactly the kind of small Southern town she had taught her audience to despise. Kennedy's final revelation was delivered with devastating gentleness. "Ms. Williams, or should I say Ms. Watkins, you called me a backward hick last night for representing the people of Louisiana, but it seems like you've spent your entire career trying to hide the fact that you're from the same kind of place you now mock, and that you've never had the educational credentials you've claimed to possess." Kennedy paused, letting the weight of his words settle before delivering his conclusion. "I'm proud to be from Louisiana, Ms. Williams. I'm proud to represent people who work with their hands and speak with accents and hold traditional values. The question is, why are you so ashamed of being from Tennessee that you've spent years lying about who you really are?" The question hung in the air like a sword of Damocles, and Williams sat completely still, unable to respond without either confirming Kennedy's allegations or compounding her deception with additional lies. Around the CNN newsroom, producers began frantically checking their own records, suddenly understanding that their star anchor might have built her career on lies. The aftermath was swift and merciless. Within hours, investigative journalists were confirming Kennedy's allegations about Williams's fabricated background. CNN was forced to acknowledge that their star anchor had indeed lied about her educational credentials and professional experience, and that the network had failed to properly verify her qualifications before hiring her. Williams attempted to salvage her career with a tearful on-air apology, claiming that her deceptions had been motivated by a desire to overcome prejudice against her rural Southern background. But the damage was done. Her credibility was destroyed, her show was canceled, and she became a symbol of media hypocrisy and dishonesty. For Kennedy, the incident reinforced his belief that authentic character was more valuable than manufactured credentials or affected sophistication. The backward hick from Louisiana had exposed one of cable news's most prominent figures as a fraud who had built her career on lies, while attacking others for their authentic backgrounds. The lesson was clear. In America, where you came from mattered less than who you chose to become. But pretending to be someone you weren't would eventually catch up with you. Kennedy's patient, methodical destruction of Williams's pretensions had proven that integrity and honesty would always triumph over deception and manufactured elitism. Years later, when asked about the interview, Kennedy would often note that Williams's greatest mistake hadn't been lying about her background, but being ashamed of it. America was built by people from small towns and humble beginnings, he would observe, and there was no shame in representing their values and perspectives on the national stage. The real tragedy, Kennedy reflected, was that Williams could have been an authentic voice for rural Americans in national media if she had embraced rather than hidden her origins. Instead, she had chosen to mock the very people she could have represented, and her deception had ultimately destroyed not just her career, but her ability to contribute meaningfully to the national conversation she had once dominated. If this story of authenticity triumphing over pretense inspired you, please support our channel with a like and subscription. Every interaction helps us share more tales that remind us of the power of being true to your origins, the dangers of building careers on lies, and the importance of authentic representation in public discourse. Let's keep these important conversations alive. one story at a time.